Dear all, today we would like to start our first video related to pandemic measures. And actually, we are going to manage through the COVID-19 together with you. I have my colleagues with me. So it's Richard Brihonia, who is our tax and legal partner in Kazakhstan. I have Elena Ryzhkova, who is our legal director in Kazakhstan, and Mirza Sakurov, who is our senior manager in advisory department. And basically, we are going to discuss all those questions together with you. Mirza, I think the first question goes to you. Given this unusual situation which we face today, so what kind of economic measures do you think we should be applying? What key measures should be taken?
Thank you, Dana. So, as cases of coronavirus in Kazakhstan are still increasing, the economic activity has been seriously disrupted. So for most companies, the safeguarding and stabilizing the operations, liquidity, people, supply chains, and markets has been the overwhelming first priority so far. On the government side, we see that it is supplying all the available resources to limit the pandemic's human and economic cost. Here, the government's visible initiatives include the economic stabilization funds, grants, loan facilities, and of course, the state support measures around the tax regulation.
Okay, thank you, Mirza. Well, I think logically then our question should go to Richard. Well, Richard, given you for so many years operates in tax environment, what kind of tax measures or kind of tax support is available from the government side today in Kazakhstan?
Yeah, Dana, thank you for having me on this call. I think, as Mirza was saying, the state of Kazakhstan was very quick in providing support also in the tax area, for both small and medium enterprises as well as businesses at large. For example, for small and medium enterprises, they provided for postponement for the payment of tax until the end of May. They have stopped all the tax inspections, as well as for certain goods, they have reduced the VAT from 12% to 8%. And then for businesses at large, so in general, there is a postponement of filing of the tax returns again until the end of May, as well as some other measures that have been taken. So I think the government has really stepped up and provided support.
Well, thank you, Richard. But I think all those measures apply like domestic transactions, let's say, yeah. But I know that you have a big number of international clients, and if we speak about cross-border operations or cross-border transactions, so what kind of tax implications do you see in this area?
Well, I think it's important for businesses to be aware and think over what are the impacts of the global crisis and especially of the travel restrictions. For example, we need to think about, well, if a company has senior management stuck in a place, either at home or somewhere else in the world where they normally don't work from, does that create all of a sudden a change of the tax residency of that company? Similarly, if employees are working, again, either from home or from somewhere else in the world where they normally don't work from, does that create a taxable presence for the company in that place? And then also for the individuals themselves and for the employees, is there an impact on payroll or individual taxes? Because again, they are somewhere where they, or at least longer, where they normally are not. So yeah, I think it is important to take stock and look at what are the measures that the countries themselves have taken to mitigate those consequences based on the COVID-19, as well as the OECD has provided some guidelines on how countries should look at these issues and whether that actually has been implemented in the countries where people are stuck. And then you also need to look at this holistically. So if you create, for example, a taxable presence in a country, you need to think about not only corporate tax, but also is there a VAT issue, or as I said earlier, is there a payroll consequence of what is now happening and people working from places where they normally do not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed, Richard, like very unusual type of situation. Then I think new era for tax planning, tax structuring, I would say. Yeah, and Mirza, well, given this uncertain and unusual situation, like what in terms of speaking about future, so how fast could be the economic recovery? Do you have any expectations?
Well, this is, I think, one of the most important questions that people are thinking of now. And we have asked for opinions of CFOs globally on this, and half of them believe that their operations could return to the normal within 3 months if the coronavirus pandemic ends today. But at the same time, 70% of them are greatly concerned about the potential business impact of the crisis. And this also applies to our market here in Kazakhstan. And despite the announcement of effective, extensive fiscal and monetary policy, the responses that Richard and I mentioned earlier, it is still unclear if those measures will become effective fast enough. So at this moment, global recession and recession in our region seems unavoidable. So the companies now, given the uncertainty, have to adapt to it, taking the tactical steps, optimizing costs, including the tax costs, and operating in this given new reality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mirza. Well, Richard, I think we're again coming back to you. So if we speak about optimization and in particular tax optimization, do you have any ideas like what the clients should think about?
Yeah, I think in times like this, well, in general, and for sure in times like this, cash is king. And it is important to look at, well, including the tax costs. So it is important to look at, well, how can I optimize my taxes? I think there are several things one can think of, and depends on the activities and the industry one is active in. But in general, one idea is to look at, well, at the beginning of the year, you made an assessment of what your profits would be and what the tax then would be that you would need to pay for 2020. Most likely, because of the crisis, that has changed. So maybe it is now time to reduce those advanced corporate tax payments, because at the end of the day, your corporate tax, your profit and your corporate tax is most likely lower. Another option to look at as well, what are the taxes that I've paid that I can ask back? For example, is there withholding tax that I've paid on an international payment that actually there is treaty protection so that I can request back from that particular state, or any other issues that, for example, refund of VAT. So that could be other options to look at, and then. And for oil and gas, which is a big industry in Kazakhstan, there are specific tax benefits. For example, you get an additional deduction if you have certain research and development costs. That is all to stimulate innovation in Kazakhstan and in this industry. Then you get a deduction of 150%. So it's maybe also time now to look at, well, do I have such costs and can I claim an additional deduction? So I think what I'm saying is that it is important for businesses to look at, well, what is the support that the government is providing me in this crisis? And if there is no such specific support, is it fair and appropriate maybe to lobby and ask for support for my business or my industry? And in general, look at the options available in the current legislation to get cash back.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Richard. Well, you several times have used the word support, yeah? So it's always one head is good, but two heads are better. So in terms if we speak about support, like what kind of support do you think we can provide? Like if there's anything PwC can help with?
Yeah, well, as we like to say, we are a one-stop shop. so we can analyze and look for the options that are available to save and to optimize cost. We can help document as and where needed those costs, as well as we can support with applying for the benefits or lobbying the state support.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I think in this current environment, we should consider two sides. Yeah, the first, like how to optimize the savings, and from the other side, maybe how to protect, let's say, our own interest. Or, for example, if there is a risk to have additional tax assessment. Did you consider this option?
Yeah, I think in this time of the crisis and with travel restrictions and the changes in the businesses and supply chains, there will be unusual and maybe even higher costs for businesses, which may later on during a tax audit, for example, raise questions. So I think it is important for businesses to prepare now for the future and to basically create a defense file for those expenses. Look at the HR policies as well as the tax accounting policies. Do they need to be amended? As well as employment contracts for the employees, because a lot is changing for them as well, and also for the employer. So maybe we need to make amendments there as well to, again, be ready and substantiate the cost and the additional costs we are making, or one is making as a business.
Well, thank you, Richard. I think you have covered very interesting areas, yeah, like so what to consider from optimization point of view, where to ask some cashback, and how to protect own interests. Thank you very much. And Lena, given you are with us, so I also would like to take this opportunity, and given you lead our legal practice, so what are the main, like, let's say, concerns which you hear from the clients? What are the critical points from legal point of view?
Thank you, Dana. Well, we are all experiencing massive challenges in these truly unprecedented times. And the profound impact of the measures that are being taken by the government to combat the spread of the COVID-19 creates a lot of issues for business. And some of the legal issues that business addresses relate to certainly employment issues, corporate governance matters, disclosure obligations, contract suspension and termination, liability for violation of contractual terms, ability to use force majeure. There is also an issue that the courts are not accessible, and it does impact access to courts and protection of the rights of the companies when it comes to appeals, and many, many other questions that are on agenda of business today.
Thank you, Lena. Well, I think if we just go through the list of the issues which you have mentioned, I think one of the most sensitive issues is the employer and employee relationship. Yeah. So what are the points to be taken into account by the employer now?
Well, of course, a lot of companies have already implemented the remote or part-time working regimes for their employees. And it is important to note that here, all the relevant amendments should be made into the employment contracts. Certain companies have already started paying minimum wage for downtime of their employees. Also, some of the employers are already concerned with the need to do the staff reduction, which is inevitable, unfortunately, in these circumstances where there is a need to do the cost reduction. So again, when these matters are concerned, it is very, very important to take into consideration various important issues. For instance, when we talk about staff reduction, it is important to know that there are certain restrictions, like, for instance, the pre-retirement age employees, pregnant women, women with children with the age of under 3 years old, single mothers, or with disabled children, etc. They cannot be cut down, and the employees should be preserved with their right to work. So it is very important also to consider that overall there is an instruction of the Prime Minister and other government officials that the jobs should be preserved during the pandemic period. And the government is looking very carefully at how companies are dealing with these matters, and it's going to be very, very strictly supervised.
Thank you, Lena. Well, you have touched really sensitive issues, yeah? And if we speak about unpaid leave, do you think that's could be one of the solutions which should be considered?
Well, yes, Dana, certainly. With respect to unpaid leave, it may be provided again by the agreement of the parties, and if it is reached. We have to stress out that these times are also unprecedented also for our labor law. Basically, all of these circumstances that we are facing in our employment relations are not really regulated properly in our labor legislation. So basically, such leave, unpaid leave, could be done on the basis of the employee's application because the general rules apply. Then there should be an agreement between the parties. Also, it is important to know that the Ministry of Labor has several times communicated its position regarding the unpaid leave, saying that it is illegal to force employees to take unpaid leaves, and it is simply not allowed.
Thank you, Lena. Understood. And I think there was also a lot of noise around those, let's say, social payments from the budget, this 42,000 tenge. Do you think that employer also can claim for this payment for its own employees in case if there are some issues, let's say, and no enough workload for the employees?
Absolutely. Small and medium enterprises may apply for social payments for its employees who are on leave without pay. Also, large businesses are also allowed that are located in the zone of quarantine may also apply for such payments for its employees.
Well, thank you, Lena. If we just try to switch a little bit to the companies themselves, yeah, and in quite many situations we hear that it's not physically or economically possible to, let's say, fulfill all the obligations which are provided by the contracts. And if we try to use the force majeure clause, do you think there is any opportunity or the right time to do so?
Well, absolutely, Dana. The COVID-19 or circumstances arising therefrom may be regarded as force majeure and thus exempt the parties from liability due to failure to perform its contractual obligations. However, for this event to form a force majeure, certain preconditions must be met, and this includes the fact that the event must be directly caused and non-performance of the contractual obligations, because notwithstanding that COVID-19 is a large-scale event, a party must still prove that performing of obligations under a particular contract is not possible. So there should be a direct link between failure to perform the obligations and the force majeure has to be proven. Also, the event must be unusual and must occur beyond control of the parties. When here it's quite straightforward because just by its nature, the COVID-19 is an unusual event and has occurred beyond the parties' control. However, in each case, it should be critically assessed whether the circumstances directly impeding the performance of the obligations have occurred beyond the parties' control. And another circumstance which have to be also proved is that it should be not reasonably possible to foresee and avoid the event. So here, of course, it was not reasonably foreseeable that the global pandemic would take place or that the emergency regime would be declared in Kazakhstan.
So it looks like, Lena, the overall remark from your side is that force majeure clauses could be enforced, and maybe in some particular situations we also can consider COVID-19 as one of the force majeure cases, but it's not straightforward, right?
Yes, that's true. So it should be considered on a case-by-case basis, and parties will still need to prove that there is a direct link, and all of those preconditions that I mentioned are met as well.
Well, thank you, Lena. Understood. And Mirza, maybe my last question to you. I understand it's not an unusual situation, and I don't know if you have an answer, but what are the next steps that the companies should consider definitely?
Well, now, given the circumstances, we believe that the companies must be very focused on thinking strategically about how they will adapt as the pandemic and markets evolve. So, along with the tax and legal measures that we discussed, There are also, I think, 3 areas to start with. So the first is definitely the operational perspective. And here we see that the acceleration of automation, the finding and cutting costs that impacts the business at minimum, and finding other new ways of working are the operational priorities for our clients and for companies in Kazakhstan. The second area that I think is important to consider now is definitely the supply chain, the most impacted area, where looking for alternative sourcing options is important, and preferably if companies look for the local suppliers who are not bound with the limitations that are in place now. And also developing the different supply scenarios to make sure that the supply aligns with their production needs and demand. And the last thing about supply chain is that the companies should be looking at understanding the financial and operational health of their existing suppliers, and these are the things to start with in this perspective. Finally, from a strategy perspective, the actions should start with reassessing the expected market demand scenarios, and secondly, revising the organizational design to be able to fit for a long-term priorities, given the cost-cutting measures that were in place. And here I believe we, PwC, are here to work together with our clients to support them in adapting the businesses and returning from a survival mode to a business as usual mode in this given new reality.
Well, Mirza, thank you. If just I could summarize what you have said, yeah. So we should think about the strategy, about our suppliers, and in particular take into account the local suppliers. We should think about our costs, market demands, and our organizational structure. So thank you very much. And so basically, I think we have went through a number of interesting areas, like in legal, like force majeure and employee and employee relationship, and certain incentives from the government. Additionally, Richard spoke, shared with us the tax measures which are applied by the government and what we should take into account from cost perspective and from the risk of additional assessment. And I think this all should be really helpful for the building up a new strategy. And I think by this summary, we could finalize our video. And my big thank you to my colleagues, Richard, Yelena, and Mirza. And dear guests, in case if you think that there is something you would like to discuss with us, we fully understand there is no ready solutions, but we have the experience from our huge global network, and I think we have something to share with you. Feel free to do so, and below you can see our contacts. Thank you very much.